All right, guys, I'm here with Brandon Leleux. Brandon is the Libertarian candidate, correct?
That's correct.
For the 3rd Congressional seat for Congress, U.S. Congress. We are fortunate enough that we're going to have all 4 candidates that have agreed to let us interview them. So what we've done is we've assembled 7 questions. You guys that watch the show are familiar with what I've done in the past. We're going to, we already have disseminated these questions to all 4 candidates to give them time ahead of time to develop their answers. And Brandon's one of the first guys that we're actually sitting down to talk to. Brandon, we're just going to go through these questions as they're written and let you answer them. I encourage you to elaborate as much as you can, because the least you elaborate, the more imagination that the viewers can have. So the more questions you can answer in their minds and in their heads ahead of time, the better.
All right, sounds great.
We're going to start with question number 1. Do you support an individual's right to keep and bear arms as clearly stated in the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution?
Yes, absolutely. I believe it's an enshrined natural right for each individual to be able to defend themselves in the way that they see fit. I don't believe it's the government's job to step in, regulate, and tell you how, when, where you should be able to defend your life or the lives of your loved ones either. I believe, like I said, that's a natural right, not granted by the government, but by being a human and an individual and having self-ownership. And that's generally the Libertarian Party's stance on this issue as well.
Okay, we're going to move on to question number 2. With reportedly over 10 million already possessed, do you believe law-abiding Americans should be able to purchase and possess semi-automatic rifles, sometimes incorrectly referred to as assault rifles?
Yes, absolutely. I believe that is easily, in the Bill of Rights, the Second Amendment, it's very easy to read that in. It's very clearly stated that, the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. So yes, I believe that as far as small arms go, individuals should be able to own any small arms they see fit, what works for them, what they're comfortable with using, regardless of whether it seems scary or intimidating to someone else. You don't know the situation, and it's simple that things like AR-15s, which are extremely common, are very ergonomic, very adjustable. They're modular. You can fit it to each individual. So the idea that you're going to regulate a weapon not based on any real world statistics, but because it might be scary or because you assume it's an assault weapon or for military purposes only is kind of absurd. It goes back to what we were talking about. Every individual has the right to defend themselves in the way they see fit, and the government stepping in, regulating any of the small arms, putting laws on it, making you wait, prying into your backgrounds, digging through all of your history, trying to find a reason to prohibit you from owning one, I think is a gross injustice.
To be clear, and for some clarity on what you mentioned specifically small arms.
Yes.
Define in your mind what you see as small arms, because that's obviously, and it's not trying to catch you or anything, but the Constitution doesn't say anything about small arms. I want to know what your thoughts are on what you consider small arms.
Okay, and in an ideal world, that I really believe there just shouldn't be restrictions, period. A free market would handle most of this, and, having a civilized society where everyone's economically prosperous, is going to benefit that, lower crime. That's kind of a different subject. But anyway, so back onto that. Small arms, I'd say, really that covers just about anything that maybe the military would use. I say small arms, I guess, because that's primarily what people are comfortable with associating with that. I do believe that people have the right to own essentially any armaments they feel comfortable with as well. I know in some, you can still own tanks and that things, they just have to be rendered inert as far as the turret goes without a lot of paperwork and hassle again.
So what wouldn't be included in that?
I don't know that there's a whole lot besides maybe weapons of mass destruction, that sort of thing, because anytime you try to regulate a market, you create a black market, it spawns more crime, and look at explosives. You could say, hey, maybe it's a good thing we have regulations on explosives and that sort of thing, but does that stop anyone? Does it deter anyone from using them for the harmful purposes that, if someone's got that ill-conceived notion in their mind, it doesn't stop them. It creates a black market and spawns off several more markets of crime and just increases a negative situation and makes it far worse.
Well, and again, just to be clear, I just want to make sure that I understand if there was anything that you felt like an average law-abiding citizen shouldn't have, whether it's outlawed now or whether it is actually legal now, and you feel like it should be. Do you feel like tell me about the gun laws that are in place now. Is there anything that you see that should be outlawed that maybe average citizens can have, or just regular citizens can have, or is there something that you feel like we ought to be doing away with that's maybe too dangerous to be out there for, again, common folk like me to have?
Absolutely not. I believe that decision rests in individuals and businesses. If there's going to be a restriction on a firearm being in the market, that would be all in place of the manufacturer. If they decided they didn't want to sell that to like the regular populace, that should be on the business, and obviously in retaliation you could not patronize that business to show your disapproval of said move. And that's how it should work. You don't need the government stepping in, mandating all of these things, controlling everyone's lives, acting like your parents and telling you what you're not sensible enough to own. Right. Like that should be up to the individuals, and that's, in my opinion, how it should be controlled.
Let's move on to question number 3. Do you support the rights of law-abiding Americans to purchase and possess magazines that have the capacity to hold any number of rounds?
Absolutely. I believe, again, that's an individual choice based on your situation, what you're comfortable with, how you want to defend yourself. Just speaking off the cuff, one of my favorite bedside weapons that I used to have was an FNPS 90. And if you're familiar with that, it's got the bizarre top-fed mag that it holds 50 rounds. And I always loved having that by my bedside because it's comforting. It's a small, low recoil round that's, kind of designed for use indoors. And with 50 rounds in there, you're never going to be in a situation where you're nervous and anxious and you find yourself out of ammo if you're in a life or death situation. And I feel like that's the real thing people need to look at, is that, maybe you only want 10 rounds in a mag. That's fine if that's your decision, but you're trying to force this on others, and it could be putting someone in a serious life or death situation where they run out of ammo when there are 2 or 3 people that broke into their house. They're nervous, maybe they've practiced a lot, and they're shaking. It can be tough to keep those shots on target. And if your family or your life is at stake at that point, I believe you have the right to determine exactly how many rounds you need for that.
Moving on to number 4. Do you support heavily taxing honest law-abiding Americans simply for purchasing firearms and ammunition? And where this question comes from, it's a proposed bill, H.R. 5717, it's basically a conglomeration of many different failed anti-gun bills in the past. But one of them in there is that they're wanting to tax ammunition as much as 30 to 50%. And this is with a honest law-abiding citizen simply purchasing and making a normal purchase at Walmart, Academy, or a mom-and-pop store. So that's why this question is actually centered around that. Do you feel like it's fair that somebody should have to pay an additional tax on top of sales tax already in place for things that they can purchase today like anything else?
Absolutely not. I am just, in general, as a libertarian, not a fan of taxes overall. I'm sure most people at this point have heard some libertarian utter the phrase taxation is theft at some point, but especially in that case, because that works, and I believe it's been ruled unconstitutional multiple times when they've tried to tax ammunition as a de facto ban. What you're doing is you're taking the lowest income people who maybe they have a High Point or a Jennings, something they were able to get at a pawn shop for $25-$50, and all they can afford to keep on hand is a box of 9mm or a box of 22. Well, guess what? Now you're limiting their options to be able to defend their life. Like, why is that okay? They don't look at these tax things. They look at this from this angle. This perspective that it hurts these people that they're always claiming to protect. They don't seem to understand that. You're really harming everyone across the board, and then you're also harming these people that, where this usually comes from, and I'm not going to stereotype, but a lot of it comes out of the left, and they are the ones that are constantly bringing up things like, we've got to take care of the low-income people, we've got to take care of the oppressed and the minorities, and things like this directly harm their ability to be able to defend themselves in their own home. You're like I said, you're limiting their options, and I believe that's just extorting people and almost in a way trying to create a de facto ban or something close to it.
Okay, let's move on to question number 5. Do you believe law-abiding citizens should be able to give or sell a gun to a friend or family member without filling out a federal form? Now, obviously, that lends itself to the whole universal background check argument. That is kind of it's not usually worded right. Usually, there are polls on the street that people say, "Do you support background checks?" And then they come back and say, "Well, 90% of the American public supports background checks." Well, we do, because we have some in place already.
Yes.
What they're really talking about is universal background checks. When they use that phrase, it's simply, I can't sell you a gun outright. I can't sell one to Chad, or can't give one to a friend or a family member. And we know that that is a hot topic for them because they continue, just like in this Bill H.R. 5717, they continue to tweak the rules with universal background checks. It used to be you could not sell or give to anyone without filling out a 4473 form. Now they've tweaked in H.R. 5717, they've tweaked it a little bit to where they're trying to say, well, if it's an immediate relative like a brother or a wife or a son. So they're trying to, they realize that it's wrong what they were trying to do. However, they're still trying to outlaw private gun sales to anybody else outside of that. And my question to you is, do you feel like that is right?
I do not. I believe, again, it's a very basic libertarian principle that, the individual owns themselves and has, sovereignty on what you do with yourself and your property. That falls into that. Anywhere else that the government is trying to pry in, invade your privacy, get involved, I do not agree with whatsoever. I mean, if you want to give the gift of a gun to someone, or if you feel comfortable enough to sell a gun to someone privately, that decision should rest on you. I mean, that's just trying to jam the government into the equation even more. I feel like just muddies it up further and creates a lot more mess than is necessary.
Okay. Let's see. This is also kind of a spin-off of H.R. 5717. This question is, do you believe honest law-abiding Americans should be forced to pay a license in order for them to be able to exercise their Second Amendment rights in owning firearms or ammunition? That H.R. 5717 is also proposing that if you want to legally purchase or own firearms or ammunition, it does not have to be just firearms. Even if you, let's say you wanted to go to Walmart and pick up a box of ammo for somebody else, it would mandate that you purchased and applied for a federal license that is a renewable license that you would have to continue to pay for, simply to purchase and or possess firearms or ammunition. And do you feel like that's something that we should allow?
Again, absolutely not. I'm not a fan, again, of involving the government anymore in any of these situations because it's already so heavily regulated. It's overburdened for your average law-abiding citizen. I mean, we've seen this in effect in lots of countries. I have friends I've met through the gun community who vary from all over the world. I have a good friend in Switzerland who's told me a lot about their process. And what these things do is it ends up creating a system of elite gun ownership, where if you have the connections and the money, you can get your guns no problem. But if you're just a regular citizen, you go up and start to want to own guns, you apply for the process, they want to know why, what's your reasoning, why do you deserve to have the permit? These sorts of things all spiral out of that. And that is a bad situation, in my opinion. Plus, it creates a registry of gun owners, which, again, not a fan of. I think the less information the government has on private individuals, the better. I want to respect everyone's privacy, and that's another big part of all this and another big principle I hold dear.
Okay. My last question is, again, a very popular one, and we can tie this to many politicians who have made comments about this in the past several years. Do you think an American citizen who has not committed a crime should have his or her legally obtained firearms confiscated from them prior to them having their say in a court of law? Obviously, what this is referencing is red flag gun laws or extreme risk protection orders, whichever spin or moniker you want to put on it. But that's what I'm referencing whenever I talk about this. And again, because so many people on the anti-gun side of the movement have seen that this really is an unconstitutional law. They've attempted to tweak it over time, and one of the most recent tweaks they've done is they're trying to say, oh, we do include due process. They include due process on a portion of it. There are two extreme risk protection orders, if you want to call them that. One of them, yes, you go to a judge, and the judge, you have your say in court, but if they determine that you are a true threat, again, they determine who's a true threat. They determine you're a true threat, there is no due process. So they've attempted to separate it so they can say, oh yeah, it includes due process. It does on half of it. On one of the extreme risk protection orders, it includes that. So my point to you is, do you support extreme risk protection orders or red flag gun laws?
Absolutely not. I mean, this is something that is so clearly enshrined in the Constitution. You know, I mean, you have the right to a speedy trial for one, and you're innocent until proven guilty. The idea that you can flip that around and say that someone's guilty until they prove otherwise is completely flies in the face of the Constitution. You know, I mean, that's as simple as it gets. It's right there, you know, in writing in the founding document of our country. And again, I think this is something that you may get the argument, well, if it saves one life, but they don't look at the flip side of it. It may save one life on that side, but how many lives are you harming on the others, taking away someone's right to self-defense because they upset a neighbor? And the neighbor knows they own, you know, a significant portion of guns. So the neighbor calls the cops, files some kind of complaint, say they may be some kind of threat. This is where these things go. You start stripping honest people of their right to defend themselves. You leave them having to prove that they're innocent instead of working the other way, where it's innocent until proven guilty. You're guilty and you have to prove to the state and the government you're not a threat to be able to have these rights restored to you, and that is contradictory on every level of liberty. I think it's one of the worst things I've seen even get close to passing, you know, and I keep track of most of these gun laws as they go through Congress, and I mean, I cannot even believe this has made it as far as it has. So I think it's a terrible precedent to set.
All right, Brandon, to finish, wrap up a little bit here. Out of the questions that I sent you, is there anything outside of that you want the voting people of Southwest Louisiana to understand where you stand and what your thoughts are on the Second Amendment?
Yes. So I've been a member of the firearms community at large for, you know, about a decade. I got into it a little later in life than some people, but I have been a staunch Second Amendment supporter since pretty much the get-go. I mean, it's clear that most of these gun laws may have been brought up with the idea of safety and protecting people, but they do nothing but harm law-abiding gun owners. And I am the candidate that will vote for your liberty, your rights, every single time. I plan on drafting legislation after legislation to get as much of this repealed as I can, to restore individual rights, to allow you to defend yourself in the way that you see fit. Taking care of your family, their life, your life, you know, protecting innocent life is what's the basis of the Second Amendment. You know, I mean, we've had the DC versus Heller, where the Supreme Court actually ruled that's exactly what the Second Amendment was about, self-defense. And I think it is absolutely critical that we get someone in Congress that's brave enough to say this and bring it up, aside from maybe Thomas Massey, and write this legislation and make it happen. Quit saying you're Second Amendment, you're pro-Second Amendment, but yet there's always a condition to it. I have no conditions. This is your Second Amendment rights are top priority, period, because I believe it's one of the most fundamental and important checks and balances that is written into our government constitution.
All right, Brandon. Well, thank you. And hopefully you've made your point to a lot of the viewers out there, and we wish you the best of luck on November 3rd.
All right. Thank you very much.